Hello, I'm Sophie Ikenya. Welcome to Focus on Africa, our top stories. As he ends his visit to the continent, the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo hits out at South Africa's plan for land reform.
That would be disastrous for that economy, and most importantly for the South African people.
Outrage on social media in Kenya as 3 street vendors are arrested for using banned plastic bags. So why the fuss? The British government unveils sweeping changes to its immigration policy. What will it mean for Africans who want to work in the UK? Also in the program, the Somali African-American model taking the fashion world by storm. Halima Aden talks to the BBC about making it as a model and the refugee camp where she spent her first 7 years.
I see the hope, and I think more success stories like my own.
And in sports, there's more Champions League action today, though their big name forwards are out injured. Tottenham boss Jose Mourinho is still confident about their chances. Thanks for joining us on Focus on Africa from BBC World News. The U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has ended his trip to Africa with veiled warnings and not so veiled warnings about business and government on the continent. Now, in the final speech, Mr. Pompeo told an audience in Addis Ababa that foreign aid was not the solution to alleviating poverty in Africa. In a moment, we'll hear what he had to say about America's rivals for global leadership. But first, he had this direct criticism of certain economic plans in South Africa and other countries.
Centralized planning hasn't worked. Look at the failed socialist experiments of years past in Zimbabwe, in Tanzania, and right here in Ethiopia. Even now, even as we stand here today, South Africa is debating an amendment to permit the expropriation of private property without compensation. That would be disastrous for that economy, and most importantly for the South African people.
Well, joining me now live from Addis Ababa is the BBC's Kalkidan Yebeltal. Kalkidan, the Secretary of State seems to be ruffling a few feathers there, but it's not the first time that the U.S. has commented on issues land with regard to South Africa.
Indeed. This is not the first time that the U.S. shows an interest in the issue of land expropriation in South Africa. Back in August 2018, President Trump famously tweeted that he tasked the Secretary of State with studying what he called land and farm seizures. So now Mr. Pompeo is giving this comment about South Africa's land expropriation plans. But as you know, more than 70% of the land in South Africa is owned by whites that make up less than 10% of the entire population. And the country is debating the issue of this land distribution. President Ramaphosa seems keen to speed up this process as well.
All right. Stay with us, Kalkidan, because those were not the only interesting remarks Mike Pompeo made. He also made these comments warning African countries of what he called authoritarian regimes.
Countries should be wary of authoritarian regimes with empty promises. They breed corruption, dependency. They don't hire the local people. They don't train. They don't lead them. They run the risk that the prosperity and sovereignty and progress that Africa so needs and desperately wants won't happen.
Now, Kalkidan, authoritarian states, those were quite some strong words, weren't they?
Yes, indeed. It appears that he's referring to China, whose influence and presence is growing, especially over the past decade in the sectors of the economy, in business, in investment and development. So this obviously is alarming from a U.S. perspective, and he appears to want to send a message to the continent at the end of his tour in Africa that Mr. Trump's administration's attempts to counter this ever-growing Chinese influence. China is now the leading trading partner in Africa, and this influence does not seem to lower. It seems to go it seems to increase by each year. So the US is attempting introducing different initiatives that appear to attempt to curb that influence. He said he praised Ethiopia's efforts to open up the economy here, and he also showed He also said that the US is interested in signing an agreement with Kenya.
All right, so Kalkidan Yibeltal, thank you for that update for us in Addis Ababa. Now, there has been outcry on social media in Kenya after 3 vendors were arrested for using plastic bags. The plastic bag ban came into effect in 2017 and has some of the harshest penalties in the world. Offenders face prison sentences or fines of up to $40,000. So why are people so angry? My colleague Shona McCallum has been finding out.
So I'm now joined by Dickens Olewe, who is from BBC Africa Online, and you've been looking at the reaction in Kenya to this. What people have been saying?
Well, to say that people are furious will be an understatement, because so the NEMA, which is the organization that is in charge of is the environmental authority in Kenya, so they tweeted out a picture of 3 fruit hawkers or fruit sellers. And they had arrested them because, according to the laws in Kenya, if you're using plastic, essentially you're breaking the law. So they shared pictures of these 3 people that they had arrested, fruit sellers, and essentially saying that, you know what, they're going to be taken to court and be prosecuted, and they're likely to be fined or even jailed.
Kenya's plastic bag ban came in 2017. I mean, how strict are these laws?
Very strict. So in Kenya, if you are, if you're caught with a plastic bag, so if you are likely to face, between 1 or 2 years in prison, or even pay a fine of up to $40,000. That's a lot, and that is almost 40 times the average wage of a Kenyan, probably a daily wage of an average Kenyan.
And what's the precedent here? Do you think these men will face jail or a fine?
So in terms of, so there are several people, since this ban came into force a few years back, there are several people who have been taken to court, but most of them have ended up just being fined, and that's likely what's going to happen here. And especially because of the public uproar, it's likely that the 3 men, at least that's what most people are hoping for. It's likely that the 3 men are probably just going to get minor fines and they'll be out there, hopefully selling their fruits, but probably not with plastic bags.
And the environmental agency, they've come under a lot of fire, haven't they?
They have come under a lot of fire. And the other thing, in fact, the other thing that probably, the reaction you're probably seeing from Kenya is because there's actually one of the local papers which has just released an investigative series about pollution in Lake Victoria, and this is showing how manufacturing companies and factories in the western region are polluting Lake Victoria. Now, the environmental agency, that's pretty much their job. They should be preventing these companies from polluting this important water source. So it's in that context where they're saying, why are you not going after big companies? Why are you going after the small man on the street who's basically trying to earn a living?
Okay, thanks very much, Dickens.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's now take a quick look at other stories making headlines across Africa. UN officials are hoping that talks between the 2 main warring sides in Libya can still resume after the internationally recognized government withdrew on Tuesday. Now, the move came after the port in Tripoli came under missile attack from the forces of Khalifa Haftar, which have been besieging the Libyan capital for the past 10 months. The UN-sponsored talks in Geneva have so far made little progress. As a giant swarm of desert locusts ravages crops and grazing land across East Africa, the UN is training 1,000 backpack sprayers ready to try to eradicate the insects that have crossed the Ugandan border into South Sudan. And the sprayers will be deployed in Magui County. Now, the UK government has unveiled plans for a new points-based immigration system. It means low-skilled migrant workers seeking work in the UK will not be able to get a visa from January. The new rules will apply equally to citizens from inside and outside the EU. So let's take a look at the requirements. People will need at least 70 points to apply for a visa. Most will need a job offer to get 20 points towards the application. It will need to be at an appropriate skill level for a further 20 points. Now, if the role carries a salary of just over £25,000, which is around $32,000, additional points will be added. Now, this also applies if there is a skills shortage. Now, speaking English will now be a requirement for all would be migrants to the UK. But there will be no entry for people doing what's classed as lower skilled work in restaurants, care homes and food processing plants. Well, Dennis Kirans is a researcher at Campus, that's the Center for Migration Policy and Society at Oxford University. He's been following the story and joins us live in studio. Thanks for taking time to talk to us on Focus on Africa. What are the main differences between the points-based system that non-EU members were using and the one that's been unveiled?
Right. There's not a lot of difference, but the differences that do exist make it a lot more liberal for non-EU citizens. So you still need a job offer. You still need to have a certain level of proficiency in English. You still need to be at a certain skill level, although that skill level has now been dropped. You still need to earn a certain salary, although that salary has been dropped. And if you have a PhD, or if you're coming into a skill shortage occupation, that makes it even easier. So you can even earn a little bit less than the lowered salary threshold.
So you're a doctor in Malawi, you're a specialist in Zambia. This has will make it easier for you to come and work in the UK if you do want to work in the UK.
Yeah, absolutely. This is what's happening. So there are more middle-skilled professions that have opened. So not just for the ultra-high skilled. So even for people who are middle-skilled professions, they can now come. They weren't previously. And certainly for those with PhDs, especially STEM PhDs, it's going to be quite a lot easier. You'll be able to enter the UK on a visa to work here and not necessarily earn the £25,000 salary.
All right, so there's someone watching you and wants to come and study in the UK. Students, how will this impact on them?
Similarly, students are coming into the UK on a points system. Not a lot changes for them. The educational institution will sponsor them, sort of similar to a job offer, but it's a university. They have to speak a certain level of English, similar to the workers. And then the final point would being that they need to have a certain amount of money to sustain them over the period of their studies. What's interesting now, and this isn't necessarily super new information, but I think as of September, they can stay for 2 years following their studies. So there's a post-study work route now where they can stay for 2 years. Any job that they see fit to work over those 2 years, they can work. And following those 2 years, at the end of that, they can apply as a new entrant to the labor market if they have a job offer and all those things in place. But if they leave university with a PhD, for example, and they're a new entrant, it looks like they're going to have a much easier time being able to accept a job at a lower salary rate. So it gives them opportunities.
So then what happens briefly to the EU members who were already in the country before this now was unveiled?
Right. This has no effect on those already in the country. It's only for those who are arriving after June 2021.
All right. Okay. Dennis Kirans, thank you for taking time to talk to us on the program. Thank you. This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. Still to come in sport, find out who convinced veteran Togo striker Emmanuel Adebayor to join a club in Paraguay. I'm Sophie Ikenya and you're watching Focus on Africa from BBC World News. The top stories on this program. As he ends his visit to the continent, the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo hits out at South Africa's plan on land reform. Outrage on social media in Kenya as 3 street vendors are arrested for using banned plastic bags. Now, the rich volcanic land of Western Uganda's Kamwenge district provides farmers with a good livelihood, but a deadly threat lies within the soil. Podoconiosis is a rare type of elephantiasis that comes from exposure to minerals in the earth. It causes painful swelling of limbs and can kill. Over 4 million people are affected across tropical Africa. BBC's Patience Atuhaire has been to Kamwenge to meet people living with this condition.
Margaret Tindimutuma is in pain. Her arms and legs have become swollen from the debilitating effects of podoconiosis. But the greater pain is from the loss of 2 sons in a space of 2 years to the same disease.
I used to grow enough food to feed my family. But this is going to be the 5th year I'm just stuck at home, like a cripple. This is exactly what happened to my son's legs and feet. I am facing the same fate.
Hope Amoti was married to one of them. On her own now, she is struggling to support her family.
Since he died, I can hardly support myself. Our children need to stay in school, but I don't have the money for their education. Some days, they're sent home from school.
Hundreds of people are affected by podoconiosis in this area. But millions across Africa suffer from this painful illness, 1 million of them in Ethiopia alone, according to the World Health Organization. The people here derive their entire livelihood from this rich, lush land. But research has also shown that the danger that's devastating their lives lies in this very soil. Using their bare hands or simple farming tools to till the land exposes them to the minerals in the soil, which penetrate the skin. A study carried out in the area in 2015 found out that the disease develops over several years.
Small tiny particles of minerals like silicon, like aluminium, like iron penetrate people's skin and enter their vessels, lymphatics, cause inflammation. That causes blockage of the flow of fluid into the limbs over time.
In the absence of a cure, managing the symptoms is the patient's only hope. Provia Arina Itwe cleans her feet 3 times a day, soaking them in clean, salty water. This has been proven to work. In the absence of a cure, managing the symptoms is the patient's only hope. Indeed, research has shown that washing hands and feet, as well as wearing protective gear while working on farms, limits the chances of contracting the disease. Patience Atweire, BBC News, Western Uganda.
You're watching BBC Focus on Africa. Let's find out what's happening in the world of sport. Mimi.
Thanks, Sophie. Now, after wins for Atletico Madrid and Borussia Dortmund on Tuesday, there are 2 more Champions League first leg of the last 16 ties today. This time, Atalanta will be hosting Valencia, and Tottenham, who are last season's finalists, take on RB Leipzig at home. Spurs are struggling with options up front. They're already without their striker, Harry Kane, and now look set to be without Son Heung-min for the rest of the season after he picked up an arm injury during the English Premier League match on Sunday.
When we arrived, we were in the -12 floor. We got the stairs and we start climbing. But immediately in the beginning, the stairs, they broke. So we were in trouble and we were finding a way to try to get. We found a way, we start climbing, lots of work, lots of effort, and we start going and going and going. And when 11 steps, 11th floor, we go. And when we are arriving on the 4th floor, which was when we wanted to arrive, somebody come and took the stairs away. So now we are in trouble.
Classic Jose Mourinho, but he did also say in the press conference they are optimistic and will be fighting. Now, a day after South Africa expressed interest, the Moroccan Football Federation has submitted a bid to host the finals of this year's Confederation of African Football Club competitions in both the Elite African Champions League and the second-tier African Confederation Cup. The bid has been officially submitted to CAF in writing by the Moroccan Federation. It comes after a letter was sent by the African football body to all national member associations asking for interested federations to send their bids before today. Now, how many footballers can boast that a 6-year-old boy convinced them to join a football club? Well, Togo striker Emmanuel Adebayor can. He says the club's president's 6-year-old son, as well as his former Manchester City teammate Roque Santa Cruz, were the main reasons why he joined Paraguayan side Olimpia Asuncion. All it took was a little boy telling 35-year-old Adebayor that he was his idol. Love that story. Now, South Africa captain Dane van Niekerk says she will work to channel the legacies of Nelson Mandela and Siya Kolisi ahead of the T20 Women's World Cup, which begins on Friday. In November, Kolisi, the country's first black men's rugby captain, led his country to victory, lifting the trophy. The Proteas women will be bidding to win a global cricket event for the first time in their history. That's all the sport. Sophie.
Thank you, Mimi. Thanks. Now, Halima Aden changed the look and vibe of the fashion world when she became one of the first models to walk a catwalk with a headscarf. She's been speaking to Stephen Saka on Hard Talk. She started by recalling what returning to Kakuma refugee camp, a place she once called home, was like.
Oh, it was a whirlwind of emotions. Like I went through all the stages with that trip because I went back at 21. I think I was 21, right? Yeah. And it was my first time coming home. And you know, like I was 7 years old the last time I was there, running around and all these amazing memories, but like a different lens to come back as an adult and see, wow, like it's like horrific. Think of some of these numbers where it's, yeah, it gets me so emotional, but I see the hope, and I think more success stories like my own, they're out there, you know, they're out there because refugees are resilient people. They're strong-minded people. They're people who have so much to give, so much love to give.
I was about to say I can imagine, but actually I can't imagine because there you were in a small town in Minnesota, and within weeks you were on the New York catwalk.
And my first trip to New York, I've never even, you know, traveled for vacation, so it's all these things happening. Rihanna's team reached out. That was the first campaign I've ever shot, was with her for Fenty Beauty. All these incredible things, walking for Yeezy, you know, night and day to, you know, St. Cloud, where it's like more of a jean town, college town, very laid back, very relaxed.
But the difficulty there is that you are entering a huge industry with vast amounts of money, and it is something of a machine, and it churns through beautiful young women and men who are part of the sales product. Did you feel at any point you were losing control?
This is why, like, I wish my mom could see, like, you should be so proud, because even though, despite I come from a small town, fashion is exciting, it's everything, right? But I still went into that meeting with my agency willing to walk away if it meant conforming, if it meant changing my values, changing who I was. And I made it very clear, and they accepted me for just as I was.
Did anybody,
4 hours.
Well, this is fascinating. Did anybody ever say to you, Halima, you've got something, you're incredible, but you can do so much more, for example, if you're prepared to model without the headscarf?
No, that was never even a question. You know, that was never even a question.
Amazing lady there. And of course, you can watch the full interview with Halima Aden on Hard Talk. That's on BBC World News and online. But before we go, let's take a look again at our top stories here on Focus on Africa. The U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says South Africa's plan to expropriate land without compensation would be disastrous for the country's economy and its people. He was speaking in Ethiopia on a final day of an African tour. And the UK government has unveiled plans for a new points-based immigration system. It means low-skilled migrant workers seeking work in the UK will not be able to get a visa from January. The new rules will apply equally to citizens from inside and outside the European Union. But don't forget, you can get in touch with me and some of the team on social media. I'm at Kenye. And of course, the very latest news and current affairs on our website, bbc.com/Africa. Thanks for your company.